17 years after his death, a new Michael Jackson movie is coming out. And if forecasters have got it right, it could gross a
John's nephew, Jaafar Jackson, will be playing the role of the King of Pop in the upcoming biopic.
April 24th, 2026. The biggest music biopic in years opened in theaters across the United States. Michael, the long-awaited film about the life of Michael Jackson, starring his real nephew, Jaafar Jackson, in the lead role. It had taken years to make. It had cost over $150 million to produce. And by the time audiences finally walked into theaters to see it, the film they watched was not the film that had actually been shot. Behind the scenes, something significant had happened. A scene, an entire storyline, an entire third act that had been filmed, edited, and prepared for release had been deleted, removed completely. Not because the studio changed its mind about the story. Not because test audiences disliked it. But because of a legal document signed more than 30 years earlier that almost nobody working on the film knew existed until it was almost too late. This is the story of what was cut from the Michael Jackson biopic. Why it was cut. And why a single sentence in a settlement agreement from 1994 ended up reshaping one of the most expensive music films ever made. The Michael Jackson biopic had been in development for years before it ever reached theaters. Produced by Graham King, the same producer behind the hit Freddie Mercury film Bohemian Rhapsody, and directed by Antoine Fuqua, the project carried enormous expectations from the moment it was announced. Graham King spoke publicly about the scale of the undertaking. He had spent years preparing the film, interviewing hundreds of people who had known Michael Jackson personally, trying to figure out how to condense an entire extraordinary life into something that could work as a single movie. The cast was built around Jaafar Jackson, Michael's own nephew, making his screen debut in the lead role. Around him, the production assembled a cast that included Coleman Domingo as Joe Jackson, Nia Long as Catherine Jackson, Miles Teller as longtime Jackson attorney John Branca, and Kat Graham as Diana Ross. Principal photography wrapped in May 2024. The film that resulted from that shoot ran over 3.5 hours long. It was an ambitious, sprawling account of Michael Jackson's life that, according to the original plans, was going to do something most biopics avoid. It was going to look directly at the most controversial chapter of his story. The script for Michael, written by John Logan, did not begin where the final film begins. The original opening was designed to grab the audience immediately by dropping them into one of the darkest moments of Michael Jackson's life. The scene was set in 1993. Michael Jackson stands in front of a mirror. Outside, police lights flash red and blue against the walls. Investigators are arriving at Neverland Ranch. They are there to search the property as part of the child molestation allegations that had just become public. This was the scene meant to open the entire film. Before audiences saw Michael Jackson as a child performer in Gary, Indiana. Before they saw the rise of the Jackson 5. Before Thriller and Bad and the Moonwalk and everything that made him a global phenomenon. The film was going to start at the moment when everything started to fall apart, and then work backward and forward from there. According to people familiar with the production, this was not a small or incidental part of the movie. The third act, the final section of the film, was designed to be devoted almost entirely to the impact of those allegations, to how they reshaped Michael Jackson's career, his relationships, and his public image for the rest of his life. In January 2026, with the film already shot, edited, and on the verge of release, a problem surfaced that nobody involved in the production had anticipated. Lawyers working for the Jackson estate identified a clause buried inside a 1994 settlement agreement. That settlement had been reached between Michael Jackson and the family of Jordan Chandler, the boy whose allegations had triggered the 1993 investigation. The settlement, reported at the time to be worth around $25 million, included a confidentiality clause. That clause specified something very particular. It stated that the Chandler family could never be mentioned, referenced, or dramatized in any film, not characterized, not named, not depicted in any form, fictional or otherwise. This clause had existed since 1994. It had been sitting in legal archives for over 3 decades. And somehow, during years of script development, legal review and production, nobody working on Michael had flagged it until the film was essentially finished. Once it was discovered, the studio had no real choice. The entire storyline built around the 1993 allegations directly involved the depiction of Jordan Chandler. Keeping that storyline in the film risked a major legal challenge from people legally entitled to enforce that confidentiality agreement. Once the legal issue was confirmed, Lionsgate moved quickly to figure out how to rebuild a film that had already been shot around a storyline it could no longer use. In June 2025, the cast reassembled for what became 22 additional days of reshoots in Los Angeles. This was not a minor patch job. This was a significant reconstruction of the film's structure, requiring a new ending to be written and filmed, along with additional scenes earlier in the movie to compensate for the material that could no longer exist. The cost of this overhaul was substantial. Reports placed the additional expense at somewhere between $10 and $15 million on top of the original production budget. Because the reshoots took place outside the window that would have qualified for standard state tax incentives, the full cost landed directly on the production. The Jackson estate, whose own legal oversight had triggered the need for the changes, ended up covering a portion of those additional costs. In exchange, the estate reportedly received an increased equity stake in the finished film. The reshoots pushed the film's release date back significantly. Michael had originally been slated for an April 2025 release. By the time the legal and creative issues were resolved, the film did not reach theaters until April 2026, a full year later than planned. With the entire 1993 allegations storyline removed, the filmmakers needed a new way to end the movie. The solution settled on shifted the entire emotional center of the film. Instead of ending with the investigation, the scandal, and its aftermath, the finished version of Michael ends earlier in the timeline, during the singer's Bad World Tour. The final sequence shows Michael Jackson performing at Wembley Stadium in London, at what the film presents as the peak of his career and his powers. This meant the film's story now stops in 1988, before any of the events that would come to dominate so much of the public conversation about Michael Jackson's later life. The allegations, the 2005 trial, his death in 2009, none of it appears anywhere in the finished film. For a movie with a runtime of just over 2 hours, built from over 3.5 hours of original footage, the choice to end the story in 1988 left an enormous amount of material unused. Lionsgate has indicated that as much as 30% of everything originally filmed could potentially be reworked into future installments. When Michael was finally released, the reaction was immediate, and it was significant. The film performed strongly at the box office, with industry analysts predicting it would rank among the highest-grossing movies of the year. But alongside the commercial success came consistent and pointed criticism. Many viewers and critics noted, almost immediately, that the film made no mention whatsoever of the allegations that had shaped so much of the public's understanding of Michael Jackson for the better part of 2 decades. Some critics described the abrupt ending as deeply unsatisfying given the scope the film seemed to promise. Others raised a more pointed concern that choosing to end the story in 1988 functioned as a kind of selective storytelling, presenting only the triumphant portion of an extraordinarily complicated life. The studio's explanation, that the cuts were the result of a genuine legal constraint rather than a deliberate creative decision to avoid the controversy, did little to fully quiet the criticism. For many observers, the explanation and the result amounted to the same outcome regardless of the intention behind it. The reaction from within Michael Jackson's own family was not unified. Some members supported the project throughout its development. Others expressed reservations once the final version became public. Paris Jackson, Michael's daughter, was reported to have distanced herself from the project, with sources suggesting she felt the final portrayal had become overly sanitized once the most difficult chapters of her father's life were removed entirely. Former associates close to the family echoed similar concerns publicly. Comments circulated suggesting that audiences would not get an honest picture of the private struggles Michael Jackson faced, nor an accurate sense of the pressures, financial and personal, that surrounded him in his later years. These reactions highlight a tension that the legal situation made unavoidable. A film that set out to be a comprehensive portrait of an extraordinarily complicated public figure was forced, by a contract signed decades earlier, to leave out the chapter that many people consider most central to understanding the second half of his life. To understand why a single sentence in a 1994 legal document could reshape a major film 3 decades later, it helps to understand why that clause existed at all. In 1993, Michael Jackson was accused of child molestation by the family of Jordan Chandler, then 13 years old. The case never went to criminal trial. Instead, in January 1994, Jackson and the Chandler family reached a civil settlement reported to be worth approximately $25 million. Settlements of this kind frequently include confidentiality provisions designed to prevent either party from discussing the matter publicly in the future. The clause barring any dramatization of the Chandlers in film or media was, by the standards of celebrity legal settlements from that era, not unusual on its own terms. What made it unusual in this case was timing. Nobody involved in adapting Michael Jackson's life story for a major studio film in 2024 appears to have specifically checked that decades-old agreement against the script being developed, until a legal review caught the conflict after the film had already been shot. That oversight, caught late but caught before release, is what ultimately determined the shape of the film that reached theaters. The situation surrounding the Michael Jackson biopic reveals something larger than a single production hiccup. It reveals just how complicated it remains, more than 15 years after his death, to tell the complete story of his life on screen. Michael Jackson's career and personal history are tied up in legal agreements, ongoing estate management, and family relationships that are still active and still legally binding. Telling his story is not simply a matter of historical research and creative interpretation. It is a matter of navigating a web of legal constraints that most other biographical subjects do not carry. This is part of why so many previous attempts to dramatize his life, in documentaries, in television specials, in unauthorized projects, have run into legal challenges of one kind or another. The story of Michael Jackson cannot be told the way the story of most public figures can be told, because so much of it remains legally protected territory. The deleted scenes from Michael are a clear example of this. A studio with $150 million at stake, with access to the Jackson estate's own cooperation, with years of preparation and legal review, still missed a 30-year-old clause that forced a complete restructuring of the film at the last possible moment. Lionsgate has been clear that the story is not necessarily finished, with as much as 30% of the original footage from Michael still unused. And with the studio hoping to build a sequel from that material, the question of how a continuation might handle the years the first film avoided remains open. Producer Graham King has indicated an interest in focusing future installments on different parts of Michael Jackson's career. His later albums, including Dangerous and Invincible, the building of Neverland Ranch, aspects of his personal life that received less attention in the first film. What remains unclear is whether any future film in this story will find a way to address the legal complications that forced the removal of the 1993 allegations from the first installment, or whether those years will simply remain outside the boundaries of what this particular cinematic telling of Michael Jackson's life is able to show. The settlement clause that reshaped the first film has not expired or changed. Whatever comes next will still have to be built around it. The story of what was deleted from the Michael Jackson biopic is, in its own way, a perfect illustration of the larger challenge that has surrounded his legacy since his death. Even when a studio sets out with every intention of telling the complete story is not always something the law allows. A scene showing Michael Jackson staring into a mirror as police lights flash outside Neverland Ranch was filmed, prepared, and ready to open one of the most anticipated music biopics in years. And then it was gone. Not because anyone changed their mind about its importance, but because a contract signed in 1994 reached forward through more than 30 years and made the decision for them. What audiences saw in theaters in April 2026 was a celebration of Michael Jackson's rise, his talent, his performances, his historic impact on music and culture. What they did not see was the chapter that, for many people, remains central to understanding the rest of his story. Whether that gap gets filled by a future film, or whether it remains one of the permanent silences in how Michael Jackson's life gets told on screen, it is a question that nobody, not even the studio that made this film, can fully answer yet. What do you think about how this story was told, and what was left out? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because there is still more to this story worth following.